Throughout the last few months, watching the Percy Jackson and the Olympians show as it's come out has been an experience that I've looked forward to every single week. I'm not sure when the last time was that I felt this positively about a Disney Plus show. Maybe Andor? Before that, WandaVision? And so while researching for this video, I wanted to find a community of people that were just as passionate about it as me. So you can imagine my surprise when I came across the Percy Jackson TV subreddit and discovered that that community hates this adaptation. There is the occasional defense of the show, but it's usually quickly covered up by a sea of criticism. Now, I should say up front that I don't think it's particularly valuable to talk about media as inherently good or bad. I think sometimes shows work for people and sometimes they don't. Clearly, there is a huge community of people on Reddit that this show did not work for, and that is totally okay. Today, I'm going to talk about what worked for me and what didn't work, and try to understand the more outspoken criticism of the show. Alright, let's get into it. This past summer, I found myself rereading the original 5 Percy Jackson books. And yes, these are library books. I spent this episode's budget on all this printing. It's expensive. Rereading the series was a fun, nostalgic journey for me, but I ultimately left feeling like the books meant a bit more to me as a middle schooler than as an adult. And then I found myself on the website of the author of the book series, Rick Riordan, and I came across a Q&A. In one question, he's asked if future Percy Jackson books will be aimed more at young adult readers than middle school age readers, and his reply was really interesting to me. Nope, middle grade sensibility is where I live, friends. I want books to continue being suitable for middle grade readers, though readers of all ages are welcome. So why is this relevant? Because my experience of rereading the Percy Jackson books, knowing they were aimed at younger readers but still enjoying them as someone in their late 20s, was very similar to my experience of watching the show. Just like Rick Riordan is clearly aware of who his primary audience is for his books, he carries that same clarity for his show, and that's really refreshing to see, especially when so many movies and shows these days don't seem to know who they're for. Like I discussed in my earlier video essay, Sex Scenes Are Disappearing from Movies, Hollywood executives are aiming their projects at the largest possible audience, at the detriment to those projects. I mean, the most recent Star Wars film trilogy was stuck between playing the nostalgia card for older fans, while also passing the torch to the next generation. And ultimately, while splitting the difference, they didn't do a great job with either side. And unfortunately, almost all Star Wars media produced by Disney has this feeling of trying to appeal to everyone, except maybe Andor, which is clearly aimed at adults. But unlike recent Star Wars media, the Percy Jackson show really doesn't rely a lot on older fans' nostalgia to keep it running. It's not constantly trying to do like a wink and a nod and be like, remember that? It exists as its own thing that newer fans can enjoy without feeling like it's a party they weren't invited to. The creators also do other things to invite in younger viewers, like basing the show around themes that are relevant to their lives. Like coming of age and growing into your own person as a teenager, finding your own identity outside of the confines of your family unit, feeling like an outsider and finding people that truly understand you. These themes are obviously universal and they can appeal to adult audiences, but we see them most often used in young adult media, and they're used a lot in the Percy Jackson books. The show is also not particularly violent and doesn't include any adult language. When the first adaptation of the Percy Jackson books was made, that movie Percy Jackson and the Olympians, The Lightning Thief, Rick Riordan actually shared an email with the film's producers, saying that, "I don't mind being a little subversive and pushing boundaries, but there is nothing radical, fresh, or interesting about biatch, ass, or shit." As it is, the script will offend the parents of younger children and alienate what should be its core audience while gaining nothing. So clearly making the Disney Plus show kid-friendly was a priority for the creative team. The show also appeals to a middle school age audience by just casting people that are around their age. This is something the Percy Jackson movies did not do. The producers of those movies decided to age up the characters to be 17, and they also look and act even older than that.
Ooh, the daughters of Aphrodite.
Particularly the actor who plays Grover, who I know is supposed to look older than Percy, but I don't think he's supposed to look like he's in his late 20s, which the actor does. This dude is an adult running around a kids camp. Percy Jackson has never really been like Harry Potter or Hunger Games, trying to capture readers of all ages. It's much more clearly aimed at kids, and that allows it to stand apart from the rest. Of course, not everyone agrees that the show should have been aimed at kids. There are a number of posts that claim the series is worse because it has a younger target audience. There are also some on social media pointing out that Nielsen reported that only 25% of Percy Jackson's audience, as of the release of episode 3, were under 17. So why not aim the show at those older audiences? The thing is, I totally personally see this statistic as an opportunity for growth. I think if the show does well, which it seems like it is, it could build a newer, younger audience over time. Instead of doing what Star Wars did, stunting its growth by only appealing to older fans, it's actively pursuing that new audience. Also, what would an adult appealing Percy Jackson show even look like? I mean, the closest we ever got to that was the movie, and everyone hated that. If you want to have an honest adaptation of the books, then you kind of need to appeal to the same audience that the books are appealing to. Ultimately, I've had a similar experience watching this show as I did watching Avatar: The Last Airbender. My fiance calls this a cup of tea show. You brew up a cup of tea, you turn off all the lights, you get on your blanket, and you just enjoy something that's like a little lighter than your average adult-aimed media. Plenty of adults love Avatar, but I think it would be a stretch to say it's aimed at them. It has some darker themes, but it's still appropriate for kids. And I think this Percy Jackson show is in the same boat. The next thing I think the show does well is that it's quite faithful to the original source material. Now, this might be the most controversial thing I talk about today because a lot of the criticism is about how it's not faithful enough. And you know what? I get that. When you really, really care about a book series, even the small changes can drive you completely insane. For instance, as a kid, I was a big Harry Potter fan, and even now, whenever I rewatch the final Harry Potter movie, it drives me insane that Voldemort crumbles into dust after he's killed, while in the book, he just fell over dead like anyone else. This kind of thing keeps me up at night. I've done a ton of internet research on why this was done. Originally, they had him fall over dead like he did in the book. Test audiences were confused as to whether or not he actually died, and they inserted this shot in instead. When you really care about something, a tiny detail that won't matter to 99.9% of people can really matter to you. With that said, I think the Percy Jackson show, don't hate me, is mostly true to the spirit of the characters and the world that's created in the book. And where there are changes, I think mostly, they're done well.
You suck!
Again, I want to compare this to the Percy Jackson movies, which everyone really hated. In the first movie, there are many major plot points that are removed or changed. Like, the main driving point for Percy to go on the quest and the main objective of the quest is changed. The main antagonist, Ares, is completely removed. The final fight between Percy and Ares in Santa Monica is removed, which is a moment that the fans and Rick Riordan care a lot about. More importantly than that, the movie seems to misunderstand almost all of the main characters. Annabeth is portrayed more as a love interest in the movies rather than her own person. She's seen as the unattainable cool girl at camp, naturally beautiful and an amazing fighter, while her portrayal in the first book is more of a kind of loner that's extremely smart, loyal, and complicated. She's more of an outsider like Percy. The same goes for Grover, who I always saw in the books as a deeply earnest, introverted, kind of puppy-like character. In the movies, he's very outgoing and charismatic. He's fun to watch, but he's like the opposite of how he is in the books. Also in the movie, Percy and Annabeth are constantly flirting and seem to pretty much always get along once they're on the quest.
I definitely have strong feelings for you. Just haven't decided if they're positive or negative yet.
And the Oscar goes to...
While in the books, their constant bickering makes the moments they do connect all the stronger. Overall, the characters in the movie seem like the popular kids at school, while in the book, they seem like the nerds that would sit at the corner table in the cafeteria. In another email that Riordan sent to the film's producers, he predicted that deviating from the book would be a bad idea, saying that, "The script as a whole is terrible. I don't simply mean that it deviates from the book, though certainly it does to the point of being almost unrecognizable as the same story. Fans of the book will be angry and disappointed. They will leave the theater in droves and generate horrible word of mouth." And true to his word, Riordan made sure the Disney Plus adaptation was quite faithful to the books, mostly only making changes when it made sense to do so. For example, I really love the building out of the relationship between Percy and his mom in flashbacks, particularly those flashbacks in episode 7 that makes the audience really empathize with Percy when he has trouble leaving his mom at the end of the episode. I also love that Luke is very likable in this show, and you can clearly understand his motivations for turning bad. I always felt like in the movie adaptation, and even in the first book, I always had trouble trusting Luke, so his turn at the end was kind of obvious to me. There are also some minor changes, like Grover staying behind from Waterworld or Annabeth leaving the underworld early, that didn't bother me at all. Grover talking with Ares really fleshed out his character in a way that just tagging behind at Waterworld wouldn't have. And the scene of Annabeth starting to grow into a tree because of her regrets in life really worked for me. But there are a couple of changes that I am a little bit more conflicted about. Like a lot of fans, I was pretty disappointed by the Lotus Casino episode. This is getting ridiculous. The danger, or the surprise of danger, is just non-existent in this show. They knew it was Medusa's lair as soon as they walked to it. They knew it was Echidna very quickly. They knew the danger of the casino before they even stepped inside. They just know all the danger beforehand. And I totally agree with this. Mostly. For the show, they've made the creative decision of having the characters be a lot more knowledgeable about the threats they're about to face than they were in the book. Now, I feel that in the books, don't hate me for this, Riordan uses the plot device of the characters being surprised by what they're facing a little too much. Particularly in the first book, every interaction with the monster goes the same exact way. Like, why don't they ever learn that most of the characters they interact with are monsters or gods? Well, when adapting the first book to a show format, Riordan seems to be very aware of this fault. And so he decided to go the opposite with it, to some mixed results. He actually explained this with regard to the Medusa scene in a thread. When we were planning the Medusa encounter, our showrunner made a good point. If Annabeth is always 6 steps ahead, how could she show up to Auntie M's and not immediately understand that they were dealing with Medusa? In a book, I could get away with delaying the reveal, but when you see it on the screen, it's so obvious that you want Annabeth to get it right away. I do actually like this change in the Medusa episode. I think it makes Medusa a more sympathetic character, and I really like the conversation between Medusa and Percy where she explains how she was abused by the gods, particularly because this starts a season-long arc for Percy.
You could have shown your father what it means to stand up for someone you love. You could choose to save your mother instead of doing your father's bidding.
I'll link below a great Polygon article on this topic. But there are other cases in the show where the kid's knowledge harms a scene. Like the Lotus Casino episode, like that's a favorite for all fans. I think it just would have been more fun if it was a slow mystery reveal. I will say though, that little moment that's created with Percy and Annabeth where they like don't forget anything because they're together.
A little weird that I forgot a lot more stuff than you guys did. Wonder what that's about.
We weren't alone. It's easy to forget what's important when you're alone.
Like, it doesn't make a lot of logical sense, but I think it plays well with the themes of learning to trust each other and learning to feel less alone in the world. And I don't know, I thought it was kind of wholesome. I feel like often when I was watching the show, there would be a change that I would initially be like, I'm not sure about this. And then they'd add something extra like that Percy and Annabeth moment that would make me kind of come back around for it. Okay, lastly, the biggest change from book to screen is the casting of the characters, which caused a lot of controversy because all of the characters are different than they're described in the book. Honestly, I don't want to get it too deep into this, because as long as the cast does a good job at portraying the characters in the book, I'm good. Percy can have blonde hair, the other characters can be different races than they were in the book. It doesn't really matter. And I think there are a group of fans that have racist intent behind why they don't think Grover or Annabeth are right for those parts, and I don't want to entertain that at all. And with Percy's hair, like, the actor is a 15-year-old kid. Maybe he just didn't want to dye his hair black. And Rick Riordan clearly doesn't care either way. In an article for Variety, he said, "Did I care that his hair is a different color than what is described in the book? Not at all. He just felt like Percy." There are changes that have been made for this adaptation. Some of them I agree with, some of them not so much, but ultimately, at its core, this just feels like Percy Jackson to me. The last thing I love about this show is that it's just trying to be a TV show, not a movie. Let me explain. Since the start of streaming, we're seeing more and more shows that are like Falcon and the Winter Soldier or Obi-Wan Kenobi that feel like 6-hour-long films. This is why I personally loved watching WandaVision and Andor so much. There was a standalone nature to every new episode. Similarly, in Percy Jackson, every new episode had its own conflict. You point to episode 6 and say, that's the Lotus Casino episode. Episode 7 is the Underworld episode. In addition, there are character arcs that start and finish over the course of an episode. I know that's not crazy for TV, but it is for streaming. For example, in episode 3, Percy makes the decision to choose Annabeth for his quest because the Oracle says,
"You shall be betrayed by the one who calls you friend."
And he thinks they'll never be friends. But over the course of the episode, Percy and Annabeth get to know and trust each other and to better communicate their feelings. It's a simple arc, but remember this is kids' TV with obvious theming and characterization that's aimed at general audiences. And I don't think that's a bad thing. Avatar had the same simplicity and it worked really well. Another thing that defines Percy Jackson as a TV series rather than a movie is its budget. It was reported by Variety that the budget for each episode is said to be between $12 and $15 million. Obviously, this is way more money than would ever go to broadcast TV, but for a show based on a pre-existing IP that's on a streaming service like Disney+, this is pretty typical. Although some fans are saying that a budget this size should have made it feel more like a movie, I personally like the smaller scale. What I really liked about the books was that although the characters are often racing to save the world, it's the smaller chapter-by-chapter conflicts that you remember once you're done reading. And a TV show with an Adventure of the Week format is perfect for that. One thing that's clearly been impacted by the smaller scale is the action sequences. And of course, there's been criticism of this. Some fans wanted the show to be more action inclined, like the book was. But I feel like a lack of action in the first season will allow the show to only build in scale over time. Each season will get progressively bigger and bigger set pieces until we get to the last one, which is a full-scale war in New York. Percy's abilities as an action hero could also scale up season by season. So he's stumbling around in the first season, but by the third or fourth, he's more capable. There is also criticism of the extensive dialogue in the show. But I think something that's important to remember is firstly, a lot of TV has long dialogue scenes. And secondly, the book has a lot of expository dialogue in it. During my most recent reread, I actually found myself enjoying the later books more because not as much time was spent explaining the world and characters. Is it fair to say they should have shown this more visually rather than through expository dialogue because this is a visual medium? Absolutely. But I think it's unfair to say there's more expository dialogue in the show than there is in the book. Overall, I think the medium of TV works very, very well for this adaptation. Now, I have to say that after highlighting all this criticism of the show, I have seen a lot of love for it on TikTok and Instagram and Tumblr, and I don't want to overshadow that. I also want to say that a lot of the criticism I read was more disappointment than outright hatred. Going back to what I said at the start, I totally get how even small changes can feel like a betrayal to the original source material. And I'm sure that betrayed feeling is even stronger when a co-creator of that adaptation is the author of the original work. My own experience with the show was definitely not as extreme as this. I didn't hate it, but I also didn't think it was the greatest thing of all time. And my impression is that that's most people's experience with it, but the internet just has a way of highlighting the most extreme points of view. I really believe that Rick Riordan and the rest of the creative team want the best for this thing, and they want it to continue to improve season after season. Related to this, I actually came across another Q&A with Riordan where he was asked if given a second season, what would he improve about the show? He said, "Our job will be to build on a solid foundation. I think we're off to an excellent start, but there are always things we can do better." And honestly, that's the way I see the first season. A solid foundation with room to improve. During a year when Disney made so many projects that relied way too heavily on brand recognition and nostalgia to drive a mediocre story, Percy Jackson feels like a refreshing standout. Ultimately, I'm sorry if you didn't enjoy the show, and I hope season 2 improves on the things you were disappointed by. I know I'm personally really looking forward to it. Alright, that's the video. Thanks so much for watching. If you have any opinions that you want to share, I'm assuming a few people might. I just ask that you be respectful and you be open to all opinions, whether they be negative or positive. Okay, have a lovely day.